Ishbosheth is dead. There is only one king of Israel, although he's only the king of Yehudah, of the Judeans, and that, of course, is David. And that's where chapter 5 begins. Vayavo kol shivtei Yisrael el David chevrona vayomru lemor hinenu atzmecha uvisarcha anachnu. So all the tribes come to Israel, all of Israel, and they say, we are your flesh and blood. It's like going back to Bereshit. It's atzmi uvisari ata. That's what Adam says about Chava. Gam etmol, gam shilshom biot Shaul melech aleinu, ata hayita hamotzi v'amevi et Yisrael. Yesterday, the day before, right, all in the past, even when Saul was king, you were the one who brought Israel out and brought them back. You led them in battle. And these words, lahotzi ulahavi, are exactly the words when Moshe asks back in the book of Bamidbar for a leader. He asks for somebody who can be motzi umevi at Bnei Yisrael, somebody who can lead Bnei Yisrael in battle, taking them in, taking them out. And so here too, it's going all the way back to Moshe. We have these words described by Bnei Israel about David. Vayomer Adonai lecha, ata tiret ami et Yisrael, v'ata tiel lenakid al Yisrael. And God said, you are going to shepherd my people. You are going to be the prince, the ruler over Israel. Now, we don't know when it became clear that God had, had anointed David as king. I should say, when it became public that God had anointed David as king. We saw it back in chapter 15 of Shmuel Aleph, when Shmuel went to the house of Yishai and that whole thing that happened with all of the children. But it's not clear as to when the rest of Bnei Yisrael sort of got this idea or knew this. We're continuing verse 3. Vayavo kol zignei Yisrael hamelech Chevrona vaychor lahem hamelech David brit b'Chevron l'fnei Adonai vayimshchu et David lemelech al Yisrael. So all of the elders, not just all the people, but the elders, people with authority, the people with great positions, they came to the king in Hebron and they made a pact with David and they anointed David as king over Israel. So this in verse 3, this verse, which is just a regular verse, this is where we can finally say, wow, we have reached the point of David HaMelech. It's David the king. Ben Shloshim Shana David b'Malko. David was 30 years old when he became king. Arba'im Shana Malach. And he'll reign for 40 years. B'Chevron Malach al Yudah Sheva Shanim v'Shisha Chodashim v'Yerushalayim Malach Shloshim v'Shalosh Shana al Kol Yisrael v'Yehuda. So in Hebron he reigned for 7.5 years. In Jerusalem he reigned for 33 years. It's 40 and a half technically, or who knows exactly, but 40 years, which represents a generation, represents a significant time period, going back to so many things previously in the Torah, right? Think of the flood waters, which fell for 40 days and 40 nights, or of course the 40 years that Bnei Israel were in the desert, for the 40 days that the spies were in Israel, or 80 years. Moshe was 80 years old, 2 times 40 when he stood in front of Paro, etc., etc. So it's a significant amount of time. Vayelech hamelech v'anashav Yerushalayim el hayevusi yoshev aretz vayomer leDavid lemor lo tavo hena ki im hasircha ha'ivrim v'apischim lemor lo yava David hena. So what's David's first action that we're told as now king of Israel? He's going to conquer the city of Jerusalem. And this comes to us in something that I've mentioned in a number of different ways over the last number of chapters. David here is once again saying, I am not a new king. This was not a coup d'etat. I am the son-in-law of Saul, and I am a continuation of his reign. Yerushalayim is a city that's partially in the territory of Benjamin and partially in the territory of Yehuda. So he wants to go and capture the city, and of course to make it his capital, to show Bnei Israel, I am continuing in the line of Saul. He doesn't want any more war. He wants Bnei Israel to be united. And it seems that they're united with him, but he understands that there might be some people who are still upset, maybe the ones who had the good governmental jobs or governmental contracts from being in Shevet Binyamin, and David doesn't want that, and so he's going to make Jerusalem his capital. Jerusalem has not been conquered. It still is under the, it's still a Jebusite, a Yevusi city, and when David gets to the city, he's told, you'll never get in here. Even the blind and lame will turn you back. And it's not clear what this means, the blind and lame. There are a number of different interpretations. One says that they were so confident in their army that you would be defeated by the blind and lame even. There are others who say, Rashi quotes this, that it's a reference to their idols, that they knew that the idols didn't couldn't move, that they were blind and lame, but David still couldn't defeat them. Maybe it's sort of, our interpretation. Those who then turn to Tehillim, where we talk about idols in the Hallel paragraphs. And there are others who say that this was something that was set up with some mechanical statues that were set up, which guarded the city. Either way, what happens in verse 7, I'll call David at Mitzudat Zion here, David. So David first captures the stronghold of Zion, which is now the city of David. Vayomer David bayamahu kol makei yivusi v'yigap zinor v'el apsachim v'el avrim snuei nefesh David al ken yomer ivero pusech lo yavo al bayit. And David says to his men, whoever attacks the Yevusites and reaches the water channel and strikes down the lame and the blind, who are hateful to David. And that's why it said, no one who is blind or lame may enter the house. So again, what is exactly this blind and lame? What is it talking about? Unclear. Mentioned a number of different opinions, but he's going out to wage war. Vayeshev David Mitzudah vayikra la'ir David vayiven David saviv min hamilo v'vaita. And David so occupies. He's in the Mitzudah, the stronghold, the fort, which is we said already was renamed the city of David, and he fortifies the surrounding area. Vayelech David haloch gadol v'Adonai Elohei tzvaot imo. And God is with David, and it's David's getting greater and greater. David's becoming a more well-known person, and here David, comes here and he's attacked and he's conquered so much territory. Well, I shouldn't say conquered so much territory. Conquered Jerusalem, and it's again an occasion. It's the next stage in his leadership. It's the next stage in his kingship of Israel. And we'll see something else that now comes, now that David's getting stronger and getting greater. We're in verse 11. King Hiram of Tyre, this would be Lebanon today, right? We talk about the Arzei Levanon in Tanakh, the cedars of Lebanon. If you know what the Lebanese flag looks like, with the cedar tree on it. They have the great trees of the ancient world of the Middle East. And this king from there, he sends David cedars and carpenters and masons, and they built a palace for David. And David, now it's obvious to him that God has established him as king over Israel, that his kingship is significant and strong. And it's all because of the people of Israel. And this is important. If you remember, when we talked way back when, David defeats Goliath. David becomes, right? David's is the musician for Saul. He's the arms bearer for him. Seems like it's going to be a straight shot to be king. But then things get difficult. Saul hates him. Saul wants to kill him. David has to run away. He's on the run. He has all these problems. He has to run to Moab. He has to go multiple times to the Plishtim, sometimes run away from them, sometimes to be, to live with them. So it didn't seem so clear all the time that David was how this was going to happen and when this is going to happen. But at this point, David is king over all of Israel. He has his capital city. He has his palace, and he knows that God has chosen him, and it has come true. Vayikach David, and now classically, as a king does, Od pilakshim v'nashim Yerushalayim achrei bo mechavron v'yavoldu od l'David banim uvanot. Once again demonstrating that he is king. He takes more concubines and wives in Jerusalem, and he has more sons and more daughters. V'yela shmotam hayeludim lo b'Yerushalayim Shamua v'Shovav v'Natan u'Shlomo v'Yivchar v'Elishu v'Nefeg v'Yafia v'Elishama v'Eliada v'Eliphelet. These are the names of the children. Obviously, this is not something that has happened at this point in time. The same way it talks in this chapter that David's going to reign in Jerusalem for 40 years, but right now we're in the beginning of that time period. We know that this is mentioning many of the children who will be born to him later, because we know that Shlomo, the son who, of course, I'm not giving it away, the son who will take over, will succeed David, has not been born yet. Continuing, we're in verse 17. So the Philistines hear that David had been anointed king, and they march up to search for David. They want to get him, right? And they're all of them coming up to David's fortress. But David hears about it, and David goes down. into a more secure place in the fortress. Uflishtim bo vayinshau be'emek Rephaim. And the Philistines came and they spread out over the valley of Rephaim. So it's Emek Rephaim. Maybe they sat down for a cup of coffee. Maybe they're having a nice dinner, right? Imagine most of you are familiar with the street Emek Rephaim in Yerushalayim. This is not what it was referencing here. Here it is a valley. Vayishal David b'Adonai le'emor halel plishtim atitnam biadi. And David turns to God and says, right, presumably through a Kohen, through the Urim Tumim, he says, should I go and attack the Philistines? Will God give me the Philistines? Will I be successful? And God says to David, go and attack them because you will defeat the Philistines. And this to me is a very significant puzzle if we compare it with Shaul. With Shaul, Shmuel said, go here, go there. And then towards the end of his life, right, Shaul wants to inquire of God and he doesn't get an answer. David becomes king. And right there, we've been told in the past there was a prophet with David. We've been told in the past there is the Kohen Gadol, the Urim Tumim, everything is there with David. And all David has to do is ask. And David gets an answer, whether it's a direct answer from God, whether it's through the prophet, whether it's through the Kohen. God is with David and says, you will defeat the Philistines. Vayavo David b'Baal Peratzim, vayakem sham David, vayomer paratz Adonai et oivai lifnai, ki peretz mayim al ken krashal komahu Baal Peratzim. David marched and he defeats the Philistines in a place that he calls Baal Peratzim. And it's mentioned that because God has broken through my enemies just as water breaks through a dam. Vayazvu sham et atzabehem, vayisaim David va'anashav. The Philistines abandoned their idols there, and David and his men carried them off. Once again, a second time, the Philistines march up and they spread out of the valley of Rephaim. Now we know that the Philistines have long been the enemies of Israel, the thorn in the side of Shaul, of Shmuel, of Eli, so for generations already. And they may have a certain extra layer of anger at David because David, of course, claimed to be allied with the Philistines towards the end of the book of Shmuel Aleph. Right, and then the Philistine king of Gath gave him the city of Tziklag, so they have a secondary reason to be even more upset and maybe to wage greater wars. But here the Philistines, they come again for that cup of coffee or whatever it might be in Emek Rephaim. Vayishal David b'Adonai vayomer lo ta'aleh. And David inquired God, and God said, don't go up. Hasev el acharehem uvata lahem mimul b'chaim. God says, God is not just telling David whether he will win or not. God is not just telling David that he will be victorious and that I will go with you, but God gives David the battle plan. Circle around behind them and confront them at the Baka. Vayihi kishamacha et kol tze'ada b'rashem v'chaim az techaratz ki az yatsa Adonai lefanecha l'kol penachem plishtim. When you hear the sound of marching on the tops of these trees of Baka or Vaka, then go into battle because you know God is going out in front of you to attack the Philistines. Vayas David Cain, kasher tzivao Adonai, vayachet plishtim igevach ad boacha gazer. And David does so, and he routs the Plishtim completely, and David is once again in charge. David is once again reigning over the Plishtim. And this is significant. Again, a number of different things here in this chapter are significant. Obviously, number one, David is now king over all of Israel. Number two, he captures Yevus, right? We know it will at one point rename that area Ir David, and Yerushalayim will be his capital. Number three, God communicates with David. David just has to ask, and God answers him. That's a contrast to Shaul. And if you remember, we talked about the end of Shmuel Aleph, how disappointing it was. The book began with the Philistines defeating the Israelites, roundly destroying the temple in Shiloh, taking the Aron, and how it looked like we finally got them back with the Shmuel leading us in battle, but yet the kingdom of Shaul is a failed kingdom. Shaul falls in battle along with his sons to the Philistines, to the Plishtim, and they take back cities that previously Bnei Israel had. And so here, David is once again victorious, and David is getting us back where it's no longer the Philistines in control of certain areas and Bnei Israel under their control, just the opposite. God is with Israel, God is with David, and now Israel is in control of their land and of their enemy, the Plishtim.